Weird. Why are the borders in the Middle East the way that they are? What possible reason could we have for stuffing a 14% Sunni minority into a region where they're going to be slaughtered and have been slaughtered historically by their rivals? When it came to the late Ottoman Empire, that's Turkey today, modern day Turkey, or at least that's the largest portion. So we got a bunch of people who have different languages, different cultures that after World War I, they were subdivided. When they were subdivided into the borders that Europe had decided upon, it was basically the first people to set up checkpoints at those borders got to be in control. So we had Sunni in parts of southern Iraq controlling 11% of the border of Iraq, something like that. But the majority of these nations didn't exist. They existed as states, similar to Georgia, Azerbaijan, and of course, Ukraine. All being former communist bloc nations, but also formerly part of old Russia. That's right. When they were separated and broke up in the 1980s, late 80s and early 90s, we didn't have the same problem there as we had with the Sykes-Picot agreement, because they weren't divided according to what Europeans had said in 1918 or 1916. Now, what we did was essentially make it so that the Middle East would constantly be in turmoil. And we specifically drew the borders so that it would cut through and divide the peoples who had historically been the most anti-British. That's right, specifically anti-British. See, the Ottoman Empire had a lot of these individual states within it that later on became their own countries. But they were held together not entirely through fear like we have today. Believe it or not, the Ottoman Empire was not a Muslim empire. They comprised almost 300 separate religions. Can you imagine that? Having a nation with over 300 religions, acknowledged religions. Now let's take a look at World War II. After the Middle East has been broken up, which made the Second War so much easier, even with the Anzacs fucking up and hitting the wrong goddamn beach. Was that the Anzacs that fucked up? No, that was the rear echelon motherfuckers. There is no reason to be losing 40,000 troops on a beach that you couldn't take in World War I. Why the fuck go back? Now let's get to Adolf Hitler. Who did he go after first? This is our determining factor of who was right to win the war. Well, yes, it was absolutely right for part of the European powers and even the United States at that point in time. However, it needs to be noted that most of Adolf Hitler's anti-Jewish rhetoric came from Great Britain and the United States. In specific, from Great Britain, it came from Parliament. That's right, Adolf Hitler would spout the same shit that the British Parliament was saying about Jews. Their laws in Germany echoed laws that the British were trying to pass, anti-Jewish laws. In the United States, Anti-Semitism had never been as high in the United States and has never been as high, not even today, as it was in the 1920s and 1930s. It wasn't until the end of World War II that we really went, holy shit, that's a lot of fucking bodies. It's a lot of shoes. It's a lot of gold teeth. It's a lot of feelings. It wasn't until the end of World War II that most of Europe saw Jews as humans at all. But who did Adolf Hitler go after first? Did he go after the Jews first? No. He went after the most easy to take advantage of. The people that would be missed the least. He picked the same exact people that serial killers pick. The homeless and the quote-unquote mentally ill. Then he went for racial superior and inferiority. It didn't matter if you had blonde hair, blue eyes, and were 6 feet tall. If you were schizophrenic, they were going to use you for testing. Or slave labor. Now, who was it? When you say only time will tell if the right person won, or if the right nation won, or if the right side won. Well, as we can see, the sides that won did not agree during the war or after the war. By the end of the war, the three major powers, the United States, Britain, and Russia, all fought for German war prizes. The ME-262, the Horton 229, or Gotha 229. The Arado. Well, actually, all of the late war Arados. The Hans von Ohain engine wasn't much different from the Frank Whittle engine. But the Germans decided to go from a centrifugal flow compressor to an axial flow. The problem with an axial flow, and that's what we use today is an axial flow, you can actually get it going a lot faster, but it's got a lot more components. When we talk about German superiority and German engineering, everything was first of all over-engineered, and second of all of it was borrowed, much like the Romans did. Their helmet was Gallic. Their swords were Spanish. Their tunics were Greek. Even their boots came from another nation. They're Caligai. Marching boots. Marching sandals. The special towel that they put around their neck so their armor wouldn't dig in. Also not their idea. And now, much like with the Germans, with the present United States, with Great Britain, France, we have different eras. We've got the Republic era, we've got the Imperial era. Before both of those, we had the Age of Kings, primarily Etruscan kings. Alright, now we're 10 minutes into this and we haven't gotten into whether or not the right side won. Well, absolutely the right side won. There's no doubt about that. Now, time will tell whether or not the right side won, correct? No. The German people have had a change of mind because of what was done and because they got fucking busted. That's the major thing with World War II Germans. They got fucking busted. Straight up. And they went, never again. The United States, on the other hand, we got a lot of scientists that we gave special leeway. We pretended that, Mr. Brown, one of the scientists who come over, we pretended that he wasn't a Nazi, wasn't a Nazi sympathizer. But he absolutely was. Now, don't get me wrong, after the war, he tried to distance himself from the Nazis, especially for the space race. The Mercury rockets. The first rockets we sent up into space were exactly the same rockets the Russians first sent up into space. Yes, we called them the Mars rocket. The Russians called them something else, but they all came from the same place. There were two sets of rocket factories, one of them at Peenemünde and one of them on the coast of France. Giant dome over in France. Now they were trying to make something called the America rocket, Amerika. This is the first intercontinental ballistic missile, 3-stage. These rockets were built under the worst of conditions with the worst materials. And we launched them into outer space. While the Russians, they later changed their propulsion system to a liquid propulsion system, similar to the Me-163. That's Messerschmitt. That its primary fuel was hydrogen peroxide. It was very volatile, very caustic, and the chances of you exploding on landing were about 60%. Not a smart idea. Because of what the Germans were doing, yes, they absolutely did have to lose. Whether or not the Russians were doing it too, and the Russians did do all that stuff too. Matter of fact, they did it on a whole another level, and they started well before the war. Stalin's purges, well, they're going to echo for eternity. The very first jet engine ever designed was designed by a fucking Russian, whose name is lost to time, isn't it? No, it's not. Some people have gone through and looked this stuff up, and they speak up about it. About how Stalin went through and personally decided each person within a design bureau who was going to be thrown through a fake-ass court. But the Russians weren't as into the anti-Semitism as everyone else. Stalin did not fucking care what your religion was. He cared about your political status and whether or not you had any chance whatsoever of ousting him. Something that every communist leader has been afraid of. The Sykes-Picot Act made it so the Middle East is always going to be in turmoil until we allow those people to redraw their borders along their own cultural and language barrier lines. We've got people in some parts of the Middle East who have family members just across the fence that they've never spoken with. We took out literally every legitimate government in the Middle East all at once. And for about probably 60 years, I'd say. It was just one coup after another, one warlord after another. The same as when we destabilized Africa, very similarly. So now we look at the modern United States, right? Who's the modern United States going after? Who are they painting with their propaganda? Everybody who does anything bad must be mentally ill. The homeless, well, we have no representation anywhere. The homeless in the United States are worse off than the homeless in Kosovo. Because we're expected to live in a very expensive nation. We can't move out. There's no refugee camps for us. The places that you might consider a refugee camp, some of these hobo camps or some of these tiny villages, they are so restrictive as to what a human being is allowed to do. You might as well be in prison. Your stuff is not safe. Your chances of being raped or beaten on any given night are tremendous. The drugs are rampant. The weapons are rampant. What are we to do? The United States and Great Britain and France all adapted and adopted Nazi policies and tactics after the war. After claiming that the Nazis were so horrible for doing those things, and trying to ignore the fact that Americans, British, and French all did those horrible things, because we got to leave the Russians out on this one. The Russians were never really an ally. They were a means to an end. The only way that Great Britain and the United States could even stay in the war is if Stalin and the Russians were busy stalling the Germans. And that's what they did. They stalled the Germans. For 3 years straight, they stalled the Germans. The only real place that we could actually fight was where? North Africa. And when we talk about the North African campaigns, we try to bring out how great, well, Mr. Monty was. No, Monty was a heartless son of a bitch. He didn't give a fuck about his soldiers. He just knew how to play a role. And he did so quite well. But as far as being a military strategist, the guy was a fucking fud. If you were a soldier under good old Monty, your watchword was Bohica. Bend over, here it comes again. Yeah. After the war, Monty got more recognition than he deserved. And of course, just like with World War I and Admiral Jarvis, we ended up giving the wrong people credit for the wrong shit and blaming the wrong people. I see today in the United States, and saw in the 80s growing up in the United States, that all of the things we claim that the commies were doing, we were doing to our own people. All the things that Stalin wanted to complain about the Germans doing and use it to great effect propaganda-wise are all things that Stalin was doing as well and had been doing longer. When it comes to the evils of communism, at the end of World War II, do you know why World War II came to the head the way that it did? Or sorry, the end of World War I. Do you know why it came to the head the way that it did? Because all across the world, people were threatening to do exactly what the Russians did. overthrow their government. The British had to worry about communist uprisings. There were communist uprisings in France. There were communist uprisings in Germany. They had to come to the peace table, and they had to figure it out quick. After World War I and after World War II, the same things happened. Financial destitution for Germany. And of course, another fucking arms race. Now we use hatred of others to keep our people complacent. In our forced labor camps, we want those forced laborers to continue making a profit. Because we live in a communist nation, right? No, we don't. We live in a capitalist nation. Our God is money in the United States. The amount of money that is required to get justice. Well, who usually wins in court? That depends. Is it family court? Then the woman. Because there are so many free services to help women, but none to really help a man. But the rest of it comes down to who has the most money. Unfortunately, our version of the Gestapo has access to your money, your funds. If you are raped by a police officer, he's part of a police officers union. Unless you have a friend or family member helping you to turn it in. If you have to turn it in alone, they're going to send you literally to your rapist to have him investigate himself. Rape is not the only heinous crime. There's a lady today, she knows the difference between me talking to them and me being in my car having a mental breakdown. I sent her a video that I made last night about having a mental breakdown. I told her it was primarily for 3 different women. And those are the people that I was planning on sending it to. I can't find the other 2 women's information. That's the part that sucks. But all of them do the same thing, and I understand with all of them, it's not something where they intend to be that way. We've taught them to be that way. It's tough to break a mold. It's tough when somebody's telling you about their problems, and it's because they're being harmed. It's tough not to interrupt them repeatedly to say, I'm sorry, or to start telling the story about yourself because it got you all excited. You got triggered by something they said. So then you're telling about your Aunt Lucille and how she had to deal with her cataract surgery back in 1968. And you're going, oh, I didn't know they had cataract surgery in 1968, but I have no idea what this has to do with stopping abuse. In the United States, I don't see the racism the way that Germany did it. What I see is the divide and conquer. You tell the black people it's the white people's fault. You tell the white people it's the black people's fault. You tell everybody to blame the mentally ill and the homeless, and that the homeless are all mentally ill and you need to be afraid of them. And of course, we need services for the homeless, and we've got all these services, but the homeless don't want to use it. This is all fucking propaganda. All of it. And we're supposed to call somebody on Monday. One of the gentlemen who was helping me, he came by to help me today. And guess what? Library's closed. Hurry up and wait. Anyway, I was able to explain about the stall tactics. Now, in this situation, they're not that bad because I have somebody who's making some calls with me. Well, she hasn't made any calls with me. She has made some for me. I did explain to her about a little bit about the autonomy laws here in Oregon. They try to basically make it so that they can tell a person what to do illegally and then put it on the head and hands of a disabled victim who they already know isn't going to be heard. The fact that I record everything is important, but I've had 3 people here just in the last week who work at the Safeway tell me, hey, this is the kind of shit people are killed over. Yeah. I've heard that before. Amateurs discuss strategy. Professionals discuss logistics. What's the difference between a professional standing army and guerrilla fighters? Guerrillas always go for logistics. Between making a full-on attack or assault on a military base that's heavily armed and knocking out the power to the military base, they're more likely to knock out the power. When it comes to a baggage train, they're more likely to pull IRA tactics with improvised explosives devices, small unit tactics, hit and run. Logistically, if you've got 50 men, you don't want to risk your 50 men when you've got 2,000 soldiers professionally trained that are after your ass. Here in the United States, we've got it down to an art. We have oppression down to an art. If you're in a position of power and you get busted, well, you just got to pick the right woman. If she cares, she'll go spouting more propaganda for you. Nobody wants to listen to you as a man crying. They're going to make fun of you, call you all sorts of names. But if a woman does the crying, then it's poor her, poor her. Even worse is if she has a family to hide behind, which is nearly always the case, isn't it? The women who are most likely to do the most fucked up shit are also the most likely parents. Also, you might find this amusing, but there are twice as many women in relationships as men. And we're talking about hetero relationships. Does that mean that half the women in the United States half the women who are dating or with somebody else in the United States are either A, lying, or B, they're all dating somebody long distance online? Sometimes when they post that stuff up, I'm like, that's not feasible. Kind of like all these ideas that people have for getting rid of the homeless issue. There's only one idea that people have that's feasible, and unfortunately, it's a Nazi idea. See, we've had the idea of stuffing everybody into work camps. That's a Nazi idea, but it's not feasible. We've got work camps all over the United States, and the American people are fucking disgusted by it. The people most likely to have guns are Christian racists. We got a bunch of them in Nebraska. All they talk about is how they have their guns, in case some of them, insert racial slur here, come through and try to destroy their racial harmony. Yeah. These are the same people that spend $1,500 a month of government subsidy money that they get for being farmers on alcohol at the bar, so they can complain about blacks and Mexicans who don't exist there. And they do exist in that particular region. Why is it? Because they're harvesters. That's right. Most farmers don't do their own work. They hire harvesters to do it. And in Nebraska, they like to hire white South Africans. You'd be surprised how many white South Africans go through there every year. I remember one harvester one year. His name was Owen Alexander Wayne Giles, and he was from Wales. He didn't seem to agree with the other harvesters that he was there with, but he was there on a cultural exchange program. Did the right side win World War II? Yes, in part. But we also adopted the same tactics, adopted the same scrutiny and the same hatred for our own individuals. How dare you be poor? How dare you be disabled? How dare you be homeless? Americans will punish you for it. So will the British. So will the French. Oh yeah, and so still will the Germans. Fucking Farvignugan. This is why I need a Volkswagen. For a lot of these folks, they don't understand that I cannot function because of long-term abuse. Abuse that I endured in the United States at the hands of United States officials. People like Officer Waylon Lovatai. People like County Clerk Paulie Olson. People like Dual County Sheriff Scott DaCosta. And Tillamook police officers like Lothman, Martinez, Sadler, and Harrell. The one thing I've got going for me is that I collected the evidence. Well, within reason, considering the situation and position I've been forced into. Some people say I can't compare Nazi Germany with America today because they're not being stuffed into ovens. Do you know what happens when you're a homeless person who dies? Do you get a state funeral? No. Not even if you were a veteran. Guess where they put you? They put you in an incinerator. It incinerates your body, and then you go through a crusher that crushes up what's left, your dry bones. They put those ashes into a styrofoam container, and then they bury it. That's what happens when you're homeless and you die. They're not going to tell your friends out on the streets that you're dead. You just got to hope that you had a friend nearby when you die that might go tell people what happened. Did the right side win the war? Absolutely. Unfortunately, Great Britain, France, and the United States adapted and adopted Nazism. The propaganda, well, we've had propaganda all throughout history. Some people call it shit talking. Some people call it slandering, reliable. But the fact is, it's always the same thing. Like Wolnez, dealing drugs, claiming he doesn't touch that shit, trying to incite other people to harm me, including his druggie buddies. On the bright side, there's a feller named John. He got into a fight a few nights ago while having a gun in his pocket. Well, apparently he got away. I'm fairly certain that the gun that he had was an airsoft, just based on where the markings were on the side of the receiver. However, I know that Kimber has a bad habit of putting them in the exact same place. So there's a possibility that he had a Kimber. Kimber is kind of a knockoff shit piece. But most companies don't put it on the right hand side at the rear of the receiver, or at the rear of the slide. The slide is the part on the top of a 1911 style pistol, part that you cock. Now, when it comes to BB guns, that's almost always where they put it. I asked him if it was a marksman or a daisy, and he said, don't worry about it. So I'm pretty sure that it's a higher end BB gun. I mean, he wanted something that looked real, but I'm still fairly certain it was a BB gun. Here in the United States, we try to drug everybody. Every problem you can just drug out of them, apparently. Except it doesn't work. How many of these people that are drugged, their families want to say they're making progress? Because they don't have the ability to function anymore. Instead of being excited, though, like kids are, these kids sit in class quietly and they don't retain much. That was the best part about me getting off medications. December 14th, 1997. For the first time since I was 6 years old, I was without medications. And I was able to actually think. I was actually able to process information and retain it. Yes, the right side won. And no, time didn't show differently. What time showed is that the people in power are going to adopt or adapt whatever helps them to maintain that control and power, including blaming everything on, well, we can't blame everything on Jews very well, can we? But we can still blame everything on immigrants. Well, we can't do that anymore either. We can at least blame it on black people, but we can't do that either. Who are we stuck with? The same people that Hitler went after first. With propaganda, with guns, with death. The homeless and the disabled. And specifically men. Because it's thought that women are not capable of political dissidence. We also get to see that throughout France in World War II, especially during the occupation, the majority of those resisting, the majority of those who took part in the occupation or took part in guerrilla resistance during the occupation, took part in helping fleeing Allied soldiers who you don't want getting busted behind enemy lines. The majority of them were women. The majority. There were more female resistance fighters in France than male resistance fighters in France, and yet we give most of the credit to the male resistance fighters in France because it's still, to this day, frowned upon for women to do that. You want to be protected by the person that you protect? You want to feel equal in that? Well, statistically, you should probably go for a French woman. Yeah. While we still to this day make jokes about the French would just give up, they didn't just give up. They didn't want the light to begin with. And then we got morons like Gaminol. Holy shit. The man saw too much bloodshed in his lifetime, though. And when it came time, he didn't have the heart to follow through. He thought he had his people's best interest at heart. Well, what happened if a German was killed by a French resistance fighter? The Germans would go into the nearest village and kill 100 French people for that. Men, women, and children. America likes to use terror bombing. This is fire bombs, meant to scare the hell out of a civilian population. All it does is steal their resolve. Makes them hate you more. And much like Nazi Germany, Great Britain, France, and the United States all thrive on hatred. All of our governments are supposed to be for the people. And all of our governments are too busy with propaganda and trash talking to give a holy fucking goddamn about their own people.